So, like I said, I called this lecture "The Trolley Problem Just Got Digital." You'll begin to understand why. For those of you afterwards who want to see the sources, I have source sheets. I wrote like a 30-page article that's being published in a Torah Umada, like a Bible and science journal. It's also been published like in a short 3-page sort of synopsis of the ideas. So let's start without further ado. Let's see. Okay. So this is a short, like 2-minute video. It's from a very popular show, at least I'm told, in America, called The Good Place. And they did a little piece on the trolley problem. The good place is basically named because it's really the bad place and everyone wants to get to the good place. This is hell. And this guy is the devil. And this guy is somebody who found himself in hell. He's a philosophy professor. And so the devil has to give these people hell. How do you give a philosophy teacher hell? You give him a moral dilemma to try to deal with. The moral dilemma is our trolley problem. So let's see how it works out.
Why don't you just tell me the right answer?
Well, that's what's so great about the trolley problem, is that there is no right answer.
This is why everyone hates moral philosophy professors.
I'm on your side here, dude, but he is not wrong.
Okay, Michael, trust me. When it comes to human ethics, I just know more than you. I've been studying it my whole life.
It's just that it's so theoretical, you know? I mean, maybe there's a more concrete approach. Here, let's try this.
Oh, God! Michael, what did you do?
I made the trolley problem real so we could see how the ethics would actually play out. There are 5 workers on this track and 1 over there. Here are the levers to switch the tracks. Make a choice.
The thing is, I mean, ethically speaking...
No time, dude! Make the decision!
Well, it's tricky. I mean, on the one hand, if you ascribe to a purely utilitarian worldview...
Okay, so, what did we learn?
The best introduction to a Bible study ever.
Okay, so now, what we're going to try to do is answer this trolley problem. We're going to try to deal with it, and people have been dealing with it ever since Professor Philippa Foot put together this idea, or basically came up with this whole trolley problem dilemma in 1967. The philosophers basically group up into 2 sections. There's the deontologists and the utilitarians. So utilitarians, you can get an idea what that is. They're looking for the utility. It's basically a subcategory of what's called consequentialism. We look at a problem and we look at the consequences. We look at the utility. How can we get the most out of this? And so a utilitarian would say, we want to save as many people as possible. 5 people on this track, 1 person on this track. Very easy. We want to save 5 people. Then there's the deontologist. Deontology is really a fancy word that just means we go by the rules. Okay, we have rules, we live by rules. Deon in Greek means duty. Deontologists follow their duties. Okay, and so I have here, this is, Jerry Bentham is the one credited really with being the forefather of utilitarianism. He said, it is the greatest happiness of the greatest number that is the measure of right and wrong. Wow. He measures morality by how many people you can make happy. If you can make 4 or 5 people alive and 1 person dead, that's it. The question's been answered. On the other hand, so the great Jewish deontologist would be Moses. He came and gave us all of these laws. Thou shalt not kill. That's a rule. We don't kill people. If you want me to turn the wheel now and run over somebody, you're asking me to murder somebody to save the other 5. So now you begin to understand that this is a sticky problem. Now you'll say, no, but it's really not so sticky. I mean, gosh, we can save 5 people. Save 5 people. That makes a lot of sense. True, but now once you start playing God, so things get a little bit hairy, because what if that one guy that you want to kill to save the 5 is the President of the United States? No politics. But the thing is that once you start putting labels on people, what if it's 5 criminals, what if it's this, what if it's that, what if it's a mother, what if it's a baby? It's not so simple to answer this question, okay? So in order to do that, like I mentioned before, since I'm a rabbi and since we're in Israel, so I want to go through the Jewish sources. And basically, the way the Jewish legal literature, which is called halakha, starts, I mean, we believe in the Torah, we believe in the Bible called the Tanakh, and then we take these scriptural verses and we discuss them in what's known as the Mishnah and the Gemara, which we call the Oral Torah. It's basically all kinds of discussions that were happening around these times, basically a few hundred years from before our current period to 200 years afterwards. And all of these legal discussions then get, again, formulated and commentated on and discussed and tried to apply to modern times. There's many, many names along the way from 200 CE till we get to 1100, but in any case, some of the big Jewish legal thinkers are Maimonides, after that Joseph Caro from Spain, and then in modern times Rav Kook, and another guy by the name of, his book is called the Chazon Ish, is Rav Karlitz, who lived at the beginning of the previous century. So these are just some of the names of people who are trying to take these sort of biblical verses and legal discussions and try to apply them to modern thought. I'll explain who these players are as we go along. And I think that maybe now, even though this is not part of my usual presentation, I would like to address the elephant in the room. And that is, of course, that I'm giving you all this Jewish stuff and you guys are from a different culture. But nevertheless, we are all part of the Western world and we're all trying to grapple with these problems. And, whenever we talk about like Jewish-Christian relationships, so I always like to quote Pastor Hagee. One time I heard that there's this guy, Pastor Hagee, that, he's supporting Israel and the Jews. And I said, we're always, Jews, as you probably know, are very skeptical about everything, and it's for sure also with Christian-Jewish relations. And so I read everything that this guy had on his website, and then I saw this one sentence that really clicked with me. And he said, we have a lot of things. We've had a long history of the Jews and the Christians. And the fact of the matter is that if you look at it, we have a lot more in common than we do as a difference. And he says, I'm willing to walk hand in hand with my Jewish friends down the road till we get to the Messiah. And when the Messiah comes, so one of us will make a small change. Okay, so I am definitely willing to walk with Pastor Hagee under those terms, and I think that all of what we're doing here is that kind of walking down the road together. There's one other thing that I'd like to share with you that I just heard this tape last night. It was a podcast from a brain scientist by the name of David Eagleman. And he's done all kinds of like these neural tests on all kinds of different things, and he was talking about humanizing and dehumanizing people, and they did a test. They showed somebody 5 hands, okay, just hands, and then they zoom into one of the hands, and then they play a video on that hand, and the person is touched with a cotton swab, and then a person is stabbed with a syringe, okay? And how does they've got all these neural devices connected to you to try to see how does your brain react, okay? And now, it turns out the same place where your brain reacts when you're in pain is exactly the same place that you empathize with somebody else's pain. When you see somebody get hurt and you feel bad for them, and you go, that's the same pain that you would have felt. It's in the same part of the brain. So the empathy for pain, for example, is exactly the same as the pain you are feeling. You really do feel the other person's pain. So they registered, when the cotton swab went, nothing happened on the neural registry, and when the syringe went, so you went, ouch, and you felt it. Now they did something really interesting, and they put labels on these 5 hands, and they put Jew, Christian, Muslim, atheist, and I don't know what, okay? And now they went, and they measured you when you saw a person of whatever label that was getting stabbed, okay? And across the board, everyone felt pain when the person from their group was hit and didn't feel it when the person from the other group was hit. And it didn't matter, he said, also, if you were an atheist. The atheist also identified with the atheist hand and not with the religious people's hands. Insane. We are all like programmed to identify and empathize with our group. Now, that wouldn't be such a great thing for me to tell you right now, but the next thing that he said was they did another test, and they said, if we told people, okay, look, the Jews and the Christians now are together and we're fighting I don't know who, so then they did the same test and you identified with everybody in your group. So again, I go back to John Hagee, we're all in this together, Okay, and so we all need to try to work together, and I think that this whole meeting together is helping us to be on the same side and to realize that really, look, the Jewish goal is a Christian goal. We want to make the world a better place. We want to try to have a harmonious life together. We all believe that, at the end of the day, we want to get to the place where Adam and Eve were before they did the sin. Okay, so now with that out of the way, we can go back to the issue that we were talking about. Okay, so now before we try to answer the trolley problem, we need to try to answer the tunnel problem. Okay, this is a problem or a dilemma that was put forth in the past few years by a guy named Jason Myler. Okay, and what he said is, okay, it's too confusing, 5 people, 1 person. What about 1 and 1? You're going down the road and you're going to run over the kid or you're going to go off the cliff. Okay, it's 1 against 1. So now that helps us focus ourselves and move out the numbers game. So now to try to deal with that, the first source that we have in Jewish literature is a Mishnah which says 1 life is not set aside for another life. They're talking about this in the context of a mother giving birth before modern medicine, so unfortunately there was often a dilemma between the mother or the child. Somebody's going to die. What do? Do you kill the kid so the mother can live? Do you kill the mother so the kid can live? I mean, what do you do? At the end of the day, the Mishnah says 1 life is not set aside for another life. Once the baby's head is out, we consider that a full life, and it's life against life. We can't judge. And so we just let nature take its course. We have no way to intervene and play God in this situation. So now what we're saying here is that everybody's equal. 1 life against another life, we don't judge who takes over. I can't judge between me and you, okay? So now this is very nice and egalitarian, but what happens when it gets really personal? So there's a story in the Gemara in Pesachim, and it says, the governor of a city came and said to you, go and kill Plony. Plony is like John Doe in the Gemara, okay? It's just a random name. Go and kill Plony, or you will be killed. Meaning, right? If you don't go kill this guy, I'm killing you. What do you do? So this guy went and he asked a rabbi that's called Rabbah. Rabbah answered, he was a big rabbi teacher at the time, you must give your own life rather than committing murder, for in what way do you see that your blood is redder than his? Perhaps his blood is redder than yours. And so what Rabbah is teaching, and this is basically accepted universally, is that we have no way to judge between each other, and if it's my life or your life, I have to give up my life. We have a rule, thou shalt not murder. I cannot murder somebody to save my own life, period. Okay? So now, this is very well understood. It gets a little bit more complicated when one of the commentators on this Talmudic passage, which is they're known as the Tosafot. Tosafot in Hebrew just means additions. These were basically the grandsons of Rashi, who was a big French commentator on the Talmud, and so they're the additions to the Rashi commentary. In any case, they ask a very interesting question. They say, okay, we get it. You're not allowed to murder anybody to save yourself. We have no problem with that. But what about passively? So they throw up an example. They say, what if the governor, he didn't say, I'm going to kill you. He said, allow me to throw you onto a baby, okay, such that you will end up crushing him to death. One would not be demanded to sacrifice one's own life, say the Tosfot, for he did no action. Okay? The Tosfot say, I understand. The governor said, take this gun and go shoot Plony. I can't do it. Okay? But if the governor said, let me just use your body and I'm just going to throw you on a little kid that's going to be crushed, why don't you hit him? So now you have killed him passively. You didn't kill him. You didn't murder him. So the Tosfot say, basically they said, I didn't do any action, nothing active, and so I don't need to give up my life. Okay, so now there's a famous rabbi known as the Brisker rabbi. He lived in Brisk in the 1800s in Europe. And so Rav Chaim of Brisk, I didn't translate it, I'll just explain it to you. Basically he says the logic of the Tosfot here is that I understand that my blood isn't redder than your blood and your blood isn't redder than mine, and so I can't kill you, but my blood may be redder, and so why should I give up my life if I'm only passively? I'm not actively killing you, I'm only passively killing you. So that's their logic, says the Rav Chaim of Brisk. But then he says, The Rambam, Maimonides, who we said was this big philosopher from Spain, he disagrees based on the same logic. If really your blood is the same red as mine, I don't know whose blood is redder, so where do I get off even thinking I can be involved in a passive murder? And so the Rambam says, no, you're not allowed to do that. And also Rav Chaim of Brisk says the same. And so basically we have these two schools of thought that say, they all agree that you can't actively murder anybody to save yourself, but they split if you're involved passively. Okay? All right, so that brings us to the next source, which is a story about two people in the desert. Two people were walking far from civilization, and only one of them has a canteen of water. If they both drink, they will both die. But if only one drinks, he can reach civilization. Ben Petora, who's one of the teachers in the Talmud, says, it is better that they should both drink and die, rather than that one should behold his companion's death. And so it was accepted until Rabbi Akiva came and taught from the verse in Leviticus that your brother may live with you, means your life takes precedence over his, because he's supposed to live with you if you're not alive, so that doesn't help anybody. And so what Rabbi Akiva said is that if there are two people in the desert and only one of them can live, whoever has the water drinks it and lives. Okay? Now this doesn't account for like cases of, there's a rabbi in Gush Etzion where I live, Rav Meidan, and he explains that this doesn't apply to, like, you know, in the army where people sacrifice themselves. If everybody was every man for himself, the army would not go anywhere. This is talking about, you know, a general case where somebody's going to die. Basically, you don't have to give up your life for the other person. You could be altruistic and give the water, but the main I would say principle involved is that your life takes precedence, okay? It's just like in the airplanes, put your mask on first before you put on your kid's mask. Okay, so now the fact of the matter is that this scenario doesn't really help us much in the case that we were talking about, the tunnel problem of one person coming against another, because really this isn't talking about killing somebody, it's talking about saving somebody, right? I don't have to save somebody at the expense of my life. I don't have to give up my water to save him. This isn't talking about killing, not active or passive. I'm not doing anything. The guy's going to die if I don't give him my water. I didn't kill him. I didn't kill him passively. I didn't shoot him. I'm just standing on the side and deciding not to save him at the expense of my life. Okay, so it's a bit of a different scenario, but it's an important one to note. So the last piece to try to understand our tunnel problem is suicide. Okay, do I have to, I'm driving down this road, okay? The tunnel problem, I forgot to explain the tunnel problem is basically that you're on a one-lane road and you're about to go into a tunnel. There's a person standing in front of the tunnel. You've lost your brakes. You're either going to drive over them, or you're going to turn off the highway, either off the cliff or into the wall of the tunnel. It's either you or them. That's the tunnel problem. And so the question is, what does Jewish law have to say about suicide if you're confronted with murdering somebody? Meaning, we said before, I can't murder somebody to save my own life. Okay? I have to give up my life. But do I have to commit suicide? Do I have to actively take my own life in order to not kill the other person? So there are three possibilities. It's forbidden to commit suicide. It's permitted to commit suicide. You are obligated to commit suicide. All three opinions are voiced in Jewish law. One of the big people that says that you do have to commit suicide is the Ramban, who lived about 100 years after the Rambam. Maimonides, this is Nachmanides, they were both Spanish Jewish thinkers. In any case, he says, if somebody tells you, go kill somebody else, you have to commit suicide not to do it. He says, under no circumstances is somebody allowed to violate the three cardinal sins. The three cardinal sins in Judaism is murder, idol worship, and committing immorality with women or whatever it is that you're not allowed to do. So he said, and they bring cases in the Talmud. Somebody said, "You, Rabbi, have to sleep with this person," and so he jumped off a roof to avoid it. So That's the opinion that you're obligated to sacrifice yourself, to commit suicide in order to not commit one of the cardinal sins, murder being the first one. However, there's a modern rabbi by the name of Dikovsky, and he said that even the Ramban would agree that in passive killing, that's not murder. And so you wouldn't be obligated to commit suicide to avoid killing somebody passively. Are you with me? So if somebody said, take this gun and shoot Plony, you would have to commit suicide to avoid that. However, if somebody said, let me throw you on this baby, even though there's this discussion about whether you should or shouldn't do that, you wouldn't be obligated to commit suicide to avoid that. Are you with me? You don't have to commit suicide to avoid passively killing somebody. All right? So with that in mind, we're now ready to go back to the tunnel problem. Okay, so the tunnel problem basically breaks up into two pieces. There's a straight tunnel, and there's a curved tunnel, okay? If you're on a straight road going into a straight tunnel, and now your brakes give up, and there's a person right in front of you, you can't do anything. All you can do is what we would say passively drive over them. You're not giving the gas, you're not giving the brakes, you're not moving the steering wheel, you're just letting the car go. That would be called passively killing that person. Or you would have to turn the steering wheel and go into the wall and kill yourself. So from what we saw, what would you be obligated? I mean, what would you do? From the rules, all the rules that we just saw.
Run over them.
You would run over them, okay? Unless you could be an altruist and dead, but I mean, from the letter of the law, you would be allowed to just run over them. You wouldn't have to commit suicide to avoid running over them. However, if it's a curved tunnel, and the guy's over here, that means that your brakes gave out, you're not giving any gas, but you are going to follow the tunnel with your hand. That's actively going to run over them. And so what would we say according to the sources? You would have to go straight into the wall. You wouldn't be allowed to turn the wheel because that would be actively murdering them. Okay? Now before you guys go running into tunnel walls, there's one other little piece of information. And that is, what the heck is that guy doing or girl doing in the middle of the road? What are they doing there? So what Jewish law says is like this. If the person is there illegally, they have no business being there. They just decided to go ballet dance in the middle of the road, and now you're going to have to go drive off the cliff for that? No. If they have a legal right to be there, so all the things we said apply. But if they have no legal business being there, so now they are in effect causing you to die, right? They're in effect causing you to have to kill yourself, and somebody who's pursuing somebody to kill them can be stopped in any way. There's a rule called rodef, or the rule of the pursuer. If you see somebody chasing somebody with a knife, you have to stop that person from chasing them with a knife. If you could trip them, that's nice. But if you have to shoot them in the head, you can also do that too. There's a rule that you stop the pursuer because he's about to murder somebody. So now, in a sense, this woman has become a pursuer on the person who's driving there because now he's going to have to drive off the cliff. You understand? And so only if that person is there legally would you be obligated to not actively drive over them. Okay. Now we get back to the trolley problem. So the trolley problem, again, is the one against many. This is a famous Gemara it's a Jerusalem Talmud. The Jerusalem Talmud was written in parallel with the Babylonian Talmud. They basically were written in two different places. The Jerusalem Talmud was written in Jerusalem or in Israel in general, and the Babylonian Talmud in Babel. So now, anyway, they bring a story which says as follows. A group of people were traveling, and marauders chanced upon them, saying, "Hand over one of your group, or we will kill you all." Now, by the way, I mean, I have to say that, in the Hebrew, I sort of muted this, but we should all really also understand that it says if a group of Jews were on their way, and a group of non-Jews came and said, "Come and give us one of your people, or we're going to kill them." This Talmud was written in blood. I mean, this is our history, and we've had to deal with this on multiple occasions. So now, the reason I like to tell this is this isn't theoretical. Okay, this is real life, and these are real answers being given about how we're supposed to guide ourselves. So it says, one or all. That's exactly the trolley problem. Do we sacrifice the few to save the many? Even if all will be killed, they may not hand over one soul. That is the Jerusalem Talmud's answer, which says, even if all will be killed, they may not hand over one soul. That means that our trolley problem has been answered. You cannot murder somebody to save the many. That's what it says. Now, this is very difficult because, again, intuitively, when you ask ethics classes, philosophy classes, everybody answers save the many. Okay, and it's not so simple. I mean, this Jerusalem Talmud is like that's the source in Jewish philosophy and Jewish law of how to deal with this one against many. But people still have a very difficult time, and so actually, this rabbi that I mentioned before, the Chazon Ish, so he lived in Europe and then in Israel, passed away in 1953. He was asked this very question. There was a trolley problem, meaning with driving in Bnei Brak, which is, like near the airport. So he was asked, there was a car that went up and hit one person on a sidewalk to avoid these other 5 people somewhere else. And he was asked, what really should someone do in this case? Now, he didn't want to awaken everybody to this problem that happened in his town, and so he made up a different trolley problem. He called it the missile problem. Okay, it's exactly the trolley problem. It's exactly the autonomous vehicle, the driving problem. What he said was, a missile has been shot, and it's about to land on a big group of people. You are standing on the side, and you have some technological ability to move the missile. You can divert the missile and save the group. However, there happens to be one guy over here, and you're going to kill him. What should you do? It's exactly our problem, right? So, he says as follows. It is possible that this case is unlike the Marauders case. I call that previous case in the Jerusalem Talmud, that's the Marauders case. So he refers to that, and he says that's our basis. However, maybe this is a little different, and we could save the many. How are we going to be able to save the many? He says it's different because here, the Marauders case wherein one person is handed over to be killed, for there, the act of handing over someone is a brutal act of killing. And the salvation of the others is not an inherent part of this act, but is rather the indirect cause of their salvation. Okay, so I bolded a few things here. First of all, handing somebody over to be killed, he says that's brutal. That's just like murder. Here, kill this guy, right? Not only is that a brutal act of killing, but the way people are saved, it's not part of that act. By me doing this, I didn't really save them. It's only indirectly that now they're going to be left alone. Okay? So he says that's a little bit different. But when I divert the missile, I'm saving the group. I'm directly saving the group. Now this group is not going to be bombed on. You understand? When I hand over the guy, that didn't have anything to do with those people. They were all there, and they're still all there. I just removed the threat from the other people that were going to come and kill them. It was indirect. All right, so he wants to try to make this distinction. So now he goes on. He says, also, another important distinction to make here, while the act of handing over the individual can be viewed in isolation, the salvation of the group is in fact directly connected to handing over the individual to be killed. Okay, so now this is a little bit more complicated, and I read a really great article that I recommend. It was published in 1975 in the Yale Journal of Law. It was written by a woman by the name of Judith Jarvis Thompson, and it's called The Trolley Problem. And it's like, 20, 30 pages where it's not just the trolley problem. She tries to go through all these angles and try to figure out how and what we could do. She goes through exactly the same thinking process that the Chazon Ish does here. And she comes to this point, and she says, look, I'll explain it to you really clearly. Look, we call it the transplant dilemma. There is a surgeon. He has 5 patients waiting for 5 different organs. Okay? They're all going to die if they don't get these 5 organs. So now they're waiting. They're going to die. One day, a young guy comes in for his annual checkup. perfectly healthy organs. One guy, 5 guys. You understand? All I gotta do is kill this guy, and I save 5 people. You understand the difference? What's happened here, and this is exactly what the Chazon Ish is saying. He is saying that the salvation of the group is directly connected to handing over the individual to be killed. Somebody has to die for those 5 people to be saved. Okay? Judith Jarvis Thompson quotes Kant, who says that people should never be looked at as means to an end. Okay? That's like a Kantian principle of ethics, that you don't look at people as means. If I take this young guy and chop him up to save 5, I'm looking at him as a means to an end, and that's forbidden to do. Okay? Not in Jewish law, in Kantian ethics. And so too here. And so too what Judith Jarvis Thompson is saying. We can't just kill somebody in order to save somebody else. So now, he says that's different in the diverting the missile case. Diverting the missile from one side to another is in its essence an act of salvation, not connected in any way to the killing of the individual on the other side. It is merely incidental that there happens to be an individual there. Meaning, I want to save this group of people. I do an act of salvation. I move the missile. I just saved everybody. Now, there happens to be a guy there. I don't want him to be there. He doesn't need to be there. He doesn't have to be there. He doesn't have to die, but he's there. Okay, so in any case, what he's making this distinction, and so does Judith Jarvis Thompson, is that person dying is incidental and not an inherent and direct connection of saving the people. So now we're seeing that there's a bit of a distinction. He says, now, given that on one side the multitude will be killed and on the other side one person will be killed, it is possible, and he still doesn't say for sure, but he says it's possible, that we should strive to minimize losses as much as possible. So he says now once we've gotten over the deontological thing where we're not murdering somebody, so now there is another ethic. There is something else that we try to do, and that is save as many people as possible. Meaning, we're not against Jeremy Bentham, we're not against trying to save as many people as possible. The thing is that if you have to kill somebody for it, so we don't want to violate this deontological principle. However, once we're okay with that, of course we want to save as many people as possible, but still, he brings a proof of that from another story in the Talmud. He says, indeed, did not Lulianus and Pappus, who were 2 Jews in this town, who sacrificed themselves to save all Israel, i.e. minimize losses, and who it is said in great praise that no creature can stand in their holy place in heaven. What he's talking about is a story where, I guess it wasn't that uncommon, there was a blood libel against the Jews. The governor of the city, his daughter had been killed, and they were told the Jews did it. So he said, I'm going to go and kill all the Jews if somebody doesn't fess up. So these 2 guys said, okay, we did it. And so they saved the whole Jewish community, and so that's why no one can stand in their place in heaven. So the reason that this is important, besides the fact that they got their place in heaven, is that Judaism looks very highly on sacrificing yourself to save everybody. It's not that we don't want to save as many people as possible. Okay, so far so good. But now we get into a little problem. So this is the end of the Chazon Ish, and he says, however, even though I told you all these great things, and we're really saving, and we're not killing, and it's not a brutal act, and it's indirect, it's not all this stuff, he says, however, in the missile case, it is weaker than we have made it out to be, for one is killing with one's own hands. This is a term in Jewish law called hariga b'yadayim, and we have found that only handing over an individual is allowed in the case when the marauders specify the individual to be handed over, or according to stricter opinion, that the individual be liable for the death penalty, as was with Sheva ben Bichri. So what he says is like this. In that case in the Talmud where they said, give us 1 Jew or we kill everybody, and they said, okay, kill everybody, we're not playing game. So the Talmud goes on and it says, if they specified, and they didn't just say, give us a Jew, they said, give us Moshe. And Moshe happens to be, anyway, liable for the death penalty. So then there's room to give him because he didn't really do anything or whatever. So in any case, what he's saying is that in that marauder's case, we only found a leniency if the person was liable for murder anyway. And so otherwise, you can't go around handing somebody over. And he said, in the missile case, even though we said it's like, you know, there's a big difference, there's not a big difference, because at the end of the day, when you shift the missile, you killed somebody. And what he said is, Hariga b'yadayim. You killed the guy with your own hands, and so you can't do it. And so he ends, as many times the Jewish decisors, and they say this needs investigation. When it ends, this needs investigation, he said, I just told you all the different sides, but I can't tell you what to do. Okay? So now, a number of rabbis following him have actually given to that investigation. So one of them is a guy named Rav Asher Weiss. He lives just here in the neighborhood over in a neighborhood called Ramot. He has a big yeshiva, and actually they have a group of people that are working on Jewish law and modern dilemmas like this. I help them. They're writing this book on what to do with the trolley problem and how to program a car. In any case, so he looks at this whole missile case that we talked about, and he says, I don't understand how the Chazon Ish could have even thought of talking about this. You can't kill somebody with your own hands. Everybody knows that. Why did you even get into the whole discussion? He doesn't even get it. Okay? So now he says, look, I know the Chazon Ish is a very smart guy, so let me try to figure out what was he even thinking. So he goes through all kinds of possibilities. At the end of the day, he says maybe he was talking about putting a force field over that group of people. Often in legal discussions, it doesn't matter if technically things could be or not be. They're trying to find the corners of the law, and so they may come up with things like throwing somebody on a baby or putting up a force field. They're just trying to figure out a way to discuss these corners, okay? So what he's saying is, if you put up a force field, you didn't move the missile. You put a force field up over the group you want to save, and now the missile's going to bounce into the force field, and it will go on to this other guy. So now you actually didn't kill him directly. He was just killed passively, and we know from the Tosfot and those people that said, you know, passively there may be room to discuss. But even he ends, and all of this needs a lot of investigation. So he says, okay, you know, like, I'm still not sure. Okay? All right. The only one who actually is very sure is a guy named Tzitz Eliezer. He's Eliezer Waldenberg. He wrote many Jewish legal discussions in the medical field. He lived in Hebron. He passed away, I think, in 2003. Anyway, so now he says this, while he brings the Chazon Ish, and he brings all this whole discussion and the trolley problem. He says, and by the way, it's not about missiles, it's about cars. You know, and he says that people are going to kill, you know, is you going to kill the many to save, or you kill the few to save the many? And then he says like this, he says, Rabbeinu Yonah, who was a Spanish sage from the 1200s, he lived around the time of Nachmanides, Rabbeinu Yonah has laid down for us a critical general principle to illuminate the guiding principle that our sages have set for us. When they say sages, they mean the rabbis of the Talmud. For us in relating to questions of life and death. And that is to choose to be in a state of passivity. In Hebrew it's called Shev Ba'al Ta'aseh. This is true regardless of which side of the scenario we find ourselves on. One must remain passive when it is impossible to resolve whose blood is redder. Being ever guided by the principle to refrain from doing any sin with our own hands. Okay, he's saying, look, like we said in the beginning with the mother giving birth, we can't play God. We don't know what to do. Every person's blood is as red as the other in our eyes. Only God can judge who should live, who should die. So if we ever get into a case where we can't judge who should live or die, remain passive. That's it. You can't do anything else. Okay? So now the Tzitz Eliezer quotes him, and then he says as follows. In any case of certain killing, there is no distinction between the individual and the multitude. For we do not say that the multitude is to be favored. Wow. So that's pretty tough. I mean, on the one hand, he's very decisive. He's very clear. He said we need to stay passive. And that guiding principle of staying passive and not playing God, that applies whether it's 1-1 or 100-1. Okay? So on the one hand, we can sort of feel like, okay, well now we really got a well thought out, good answer, we know what to do. On the other hand, you know, it's a pretty tough pill to swallow. So I try to answer this tough pill to swallow philosophically. So there's the issue of the individual worth. Now you've got to think that all throughout pagan times, the individual was worthless. You know, they sacrificed the individual in the name of the group, literally. right? They put people on an altar to appease the gods because it's the group that matters. It's not the individual. It's only when the Bible came and said God created man in his image that all of a sudden every individual became of individual value. Every individual has worth. And not only that, the Talmud also says, what do we learn about from this statement? Man was created alone, meaning, Adam, to teach you that whoever destroys a single soul is as if he had destroyed a whole world, and whoever saves a single soul is as if he had saved a whole world. And so what they're saying here is that the individual is not just an individual and that an individual has worth. The individual is a whole world. And so what they're saying is that an individual has infinite worth. And that brings us to Rav Kook, who was the chief rabbi of the land of Israel before the founding of the state, and very instrumental in all kinds of legal discussions of how to form the state. In any case, he says as follows: it is beyond our power to estimate the value of the whole world that is an individual versus the whole world that is the multitude. Meaning, if you're infinity and you are all infinity, so one infinity against 5 infinity, it's still an identity. You can't say that infinity is infinity. Okay, and so what we're saying here is that put your money where your mouth is. If the individual is really infinity, so we can't judge whether it was 1 against 1 or 100 against 1. Okay, and so philosophically we can kind of find a way to adapt and to understand and to maybe even identify with the Sitz Eliezer that says you remain passive because you can't judge blood and blood, whether it's 5 bloods or 100 bloods or whatever it is. Nevertheless, there is a rabbi by the name of Rav Meidan. He's the head of this yeshiva in Gush Etzion that I mentioned previously, and I spent many hours talking to him about this, and he still says that it's better to save the multitude at the expense of the one. So I said to him, but how can you say that? He goes, look, who's going to have an easier time after an accident when they go explain themselves in front of a judge? The guy who said, I didn't want to actively turn the wheel, so I ran over 5 people? Or the guy who said, I ran over the one guy, but I saved 5 people? So he said for him, it's very obvious who is going to have an easier time explaining himself to the judge. So I said to him, yeah, but what about the Jerusalem Talmud that we said you can't hand over anybody? One, many, we don't play that game. The multitude and the blood and the thing, right? How can you say that? So he said that Talmud is talking about wartime. That Talmud is talking about a time when the people are under attack and we don't want to dismantle the morale of the people. We want everybody to hold together. We want everybody to work together. And so this is not a Talmudic story which should be applied to civilian cases. So I looked up, and he does have some support. There's many people who say he's wrong, and they apply it to all cases. There's many people who say he's right, and okay, fine. But so he has something to rely on. We move away that Jerusalem Talmud story. But then I said, okay, but what about the whose blood is redder thing, right? We can't judge blood, 5 blood. What are you going to do with that? So he said, it needs investigation. Okay, so now there's one last hope to try to save the many. And now I got actually this idea from Judith Jarvis Thompson. And she goes through all of this stuff. Everything that I told you can find in there. It's in Jewish sources and in non-Jewish sources. We're all doing the same thinking, okay? She says, while indeed sacrificing the individual is a wrong, okay, she understands that turning the missile, turning the car, is not good. It's harigabi yadayim, killing with your hands. I don't like it. It's a wrong. Nevertheless, it is a wrong that is permissible for him to do. Wow. A wrong that is permissible. So a permissible wrong actually has a category in Jewish law. It's called aveira lishma. Okay? You're allowed in certain very difficult cases to violate some principle for some greater good. Okay, now this is a very slippery slope, and you can start justifying almost everything in your life, like, well, but I want to have this cheeseburger, I want to have this woman, whatever it is, you can get into a lot of trouble with this. Okay, so now one of the big Jewish decisors, a noted Yehuda, he lived in Europe in I think the 19th century, 19th century. So he said, such an act is permitted only if all of Israel be saved from Hodulat Kush. This is a statement from the Megillah. We just had Purim. I don't know if you guys know the story of Purim, but basically they wanted to kill all the Jews, and Queen Esther sacrificed herself. She said, I'm going to go and sleep with the king in order to save the Jews. And so that's like a violation of a cardinal sin. She's going voluntarily to sleep with the king, who she's really not supposed to be with. And so that was a classic example of Aveira Lishma, of a permissible wrong. She went to go save the people, and she violated herself. And so what the Note of Yehuda it says is that basically you could only do that under the case where you're like saving all the people. You're doing something huge, and then they give other parameters like you shouldn't have any enjoyment for it, and there's no other way out of it. And so at the end of the day, you can't, in Jewish law, we can't really apply this to this case of you're driving on the road. Okay. So now, I want to get to the computer. So far, what we talked about was the human driver. But what about the digital driver? What if it's an autonomous vehicle? What if the computer is basically making this decision? There's no person driving. So now, the first time I heard this idea, which was from that yeshiva I told you about, of Rav Asher Weiss and Ramot, these rabbis that were thinking about this for a long time, and they said, no, the computer is different than the person. When they told me that, I said, are you kidding? What are you talking about? I know. I design computers. I tell the computer what to do. The computer is basically just doing what I said. So what's the difference? Whatever rules we came up with for a person, those are the rules that we have to apply to the computer. And they said, yeah, but no. And so now they said there's a difference between the way the computer works and the way the computer is actually approaching this dilemma. So now I talked about it with a lot of guys here, and I want to give you a few examples of answers why the digital driver is different than the human driver. So I don't know. Okay, this is actually like what we would call pseudocode. Like, and the car basically needs to make a decision. All right. I called it the trolley routine, the utilitarian trolley routine. Okay, and basically all it says is that if the number of people in my lane right now is greater than the number of people in the next lane over, okay, and I want to do utilitarian, so I want to move to the next lane. So I take the adjacent lane and I move my steering to that. Okay? I want to save as many people as possible. I've got more people in my lane than in that lane, so I move the car to the next lane. Okay? And if it's not like that, so I don't do anything, no. Okay? This is like a very simple idea of an if-then-else. I see how many people there are, and I move the steering wheel. All right. So now, the other example would be the same code, but from the deontological side. If the next lane doesn't have anybody, so then I move to the next lane. Otherwise, I stay where I am. Deontologically, I'm not going to kill anybody. The only way I'm going to move is if there's nobody there. Otherwise, I stay passive, else I stay in my lane. Okay? Everybody with me? Okay. So the fact is that this code is what's known as high-level code, if-then-else. The computers don't really work with if-then-elses. They work with what's known as assembly language. Okay? And so that little if-then-else gets translated into load A, compare A if it's 0, branch to putting on the airbags, otherwise load the next line, whatever. There's all these instructions that are executed one after the other. Okay? And the reason I show this is because what's happening is that there is no. There is no do nothing in a computer. There is no be passive. The computer is constantly executing instruction after instruction after instruction, and so everything's active. I'm either going to kill 5 actively or I'm going to kill 1 actively. There's no passive. So this was put forth by a friend of mine who's what they call a Talmid Chacham, and he also is a programmer here. And so that's what he said. He said basically inside the CPU, everything is active, and since we can't be passive, so we might as well save as many people as possible. My problem with this proposal is that we don't judge people on what they were thinking. Should I kill the 5? Should I kill the 1? We judge them on, did you kill the 5 or did you kill the 1? We judge people, how did you turn that steering wheel? What did you do? So it seems to me that looking at the code inside before the steering was actually actuated is looking at the case from inside one's mind, and so I don't think that this applies. Okay? We judge by what the final outcome was. So another friend of mine, who's also known as a Talmid Chacham, wise person in Judaism, and so he came up with this idea. It says, like, look, when the programmer is writing his code, he's writing if, then, else, right? Everything is active. If, then, else, kill 5. If, then, else, kill 1. So all of his coding, his action right now is active. So if it's all active, let's save as many people as possible. Again, my answer is that that's in your head. That's before they act. That's not when the car actually turns the wheel and kills someone. So we finally get to these rabbis from Rav Asher Weiss's yeshiva in Ramot, and they said, you need to look at it not from the programmer level, not from the chip level, but from the system level. On a system level, what are we trying to do? We're trying to save lives, right? I mean, that's how we started this discussion. The whole point of autonomous vehicles is to save lives. 3,400 people a day. We want to save people, okay? And everything we are doing inside this chip and in the algorithms and in the sensors and everything is to save lives. So he said, when you as a person are driving your car and you come upon a trolley problem, now you see real people. You see Reuven, Shimon, and Yehuda. You see 3 guys over here, and you see Levi over here. And now you're going to decide, will I kill Levi, or will I kill Reuven, Shimon, and Yehuda? You understand? You are making a life and death God decision. I'm going to kill these real people, or I'm going to kill this real person and save those real people. It's all very real. Okay? When you are programming, you're not killing anybody. You're not looking at anybody. You don't know any Reuven, Shimon, or anybody. You're not trying to do anything with any people. You're not making any sort of decision. You're writing code in an air-conditioned office in Jerusalem years before this thing is even going to hit the road, let alone years before it will ever get into such a dilemma. So what the rabbis of Rav Asher Weiss's yeshiva say, they say, when you're at the system level, you're not looking at real people. You're looking at statistical man. And when you're looking at statistical man, all you want to do is raise the statistics that more people will live. We said the modus operandi of this whole system is to save lives. So if that's the modus operandi, so too, if you ever got into a case where it was 5 against 1, so you'll save 5. And in fact, that one person that you ran over, statistically, is going to be saved more often than not because you have developed a system to save as many lives as possible. Okay, so that's the difference between a digital driver and a human driver. Now, are you guys in a rush? Okay, so then we will do a few more interesting slides. So now, after all this whole discussion, so now people, they say to me, okay, but you know, it's not clear, I'm not sure that, you know, we should just throw dice and, you know, or flip a coin. Right? Heads so we stay in our lane, tails so we move our lane. Right? You can do that. In computers, it's called an RNG, a random number generator. You run a random number generator, you pull up, oh, it's even, we'll stay in our lane. It's odd, we'll go to the other lane. Okay? And that way you don't make any decisions. You didn't play God. You just let chance decide. Okay, this is terrible. All right? First of all, the Chazon Ish says that, you know, when, before we get to Chazon Ish, there's a famous Gemara that talks about making a legal decision, making a Jewish legal decision. And there's a big argument and in this courthouse, and all the judges, so they say one thing, and there's this one judge, and he says, no, I know it's the other way. And so then this judge, his name is Rabbi Eliezer, he says, you know, if I'm right, so this river that's going downstream is going to change directions. And the river changes directions. This, by the way, all of these kinds of like legends are coming to teach you something. They don't necessarily happen. It's okay if you believe they happen, and maybe they did happen, but that's not the point. Okay? So the river changed directions. So he's right. Nature just changed course. So the rabbi said, we don't make legal decisions by rivers. So he said, okay. You know, if I'm right, this palm tree is going to uproot itself and go plant itself over here. And it does. And they say, that's very nice, but we don't make legal decisions by palm trees. So he says, you know, if I'm right, a voice is going to come out of heaven and say I'm right. Rabbi Eliezer is right. So the rabbis look up in heaven and they say, Lo b'shamayim hi. The law is not determined in heaven. Wow. That is really stunning. I remember when I first read this, I said, are you kidding? Of course, God said to do something, we're going to do it, right? So what the Talmud is teaching us here is something very, very important for us today who are not getting voices from heaven every other day. We are people, and we were given a task, and we can't depend on prophecies and voices from heaven. Our task is to be moral individuals. We need to use all the tools that we have in our hands. Today, the best we can do as a court of law is go by majority rules. That's what these rabbis are saying. They're saying, yeah, it's nice and that's good that God agrees with you. Okay, but we can't depend on that. What are we going to do tomorrow when the voice doesn't come? We need to make moral decisions. In fact, Judaism says that Hakol bidei shamayim chutz miyirat shamayim. Everything is in heaven. Everything is in the hands of heaven except for the fear of heaven. Meaning, basically, the fact that you were born now, or that you have this name, or all these other kinds of random things, you had a pizza today for lunch or whatever, all of that's just fate. What is not fate, what is in your hands, is to be a moral individual, to do the best you can to do the right thing. So basically, if we flip a coin here, we have abdicated our very humanity. We have decided we're not going to make any moral decisions. We're going to flip a coin. And you know what's funny about that is exactly this ethicist by the name of Paul Lynn, who's not Jewish, but who has written a lot on the trolley problem and this whole thing. He says, making decisions randomly evades that responsibility. Instead of thoughtful decisions, they are thoughtless. And this may be worse than reflexive human judgments that lead to bad outcomes. He says, I understand you were driving the car and you didn't know what to do and you just went like this. Fine. But if we're going to sit beforehand and decide how the car is going to be programmed and you're going to tell me, oh, flip a coin, that's evading responsibility. Which is exactly what Judaism says, that we are moral individuals. And that's really what makes us people. That's our humanity, is the ability of this moral agency to decide what is right and wrong and live by that. All right, so then we get to the altruist switch. So basically, what I'm saying is that let's say that these guys are right, and really we should try to save as many people as possible, and, but now what if it happens like whatever, different cases, you could have an altruist switch, meaning Judaism does allow you to give up your life. We saw that with Lulianus and Pappus. We said that you could sacrifice yourself for the other. There are cases where you don't have to, but you could. And so what we could put in the car is a switch that says, I'm an altruist, don't worry about it, just save everybody else. Not sure how many people would flip this. They've done studies on this, actually. They asked people, would you buy an autonomous vehicle that's going to save thousands of lives? 3,400 people a day is going to be moved to zero. Oh, of course, I would definitely buy a car like that. Would you buy that car if it would kill the driver? Oh, no. I'm not buying such a car. No one wants to kill themselves. All right, so that's that. The last piece that I wanted to go through is who decides, right? Who will live and who will die? That's what we're talking about. Who decides how that if-then-else is going to get programmed? So I counted 5 agents that could possibly make the decision. The first is the programmer, right? He's the guy writing the if-then-else. He decides. The next one is the chip maker, the technology manufacturer, Mobileye. They're the ones providing the technology. They decide. Maybe it's the car manufacturer. They're the one who's putting the technology inside and selling the car. Maybe it's the driver. It's his car. Maybe it's the government. Okay? So now I want to go through each of these. So, first of all, the programmer is not a good moral agent. I'm a chip designer, programmer. I've been doing this for 35 years. You do not want me making this moral decision without not my moral hat on and my engineering hat on. Because engineers, I just want to keep my code simple so I can go home. Okay? Don't give me more things to think about. It's hard enough to try to make this whole thing that detects people and stays in the lane and does everything that it does. Now you want me to also count? That's another line of code. That's more testing. There's more things that can go wrong. I just want to go home. Okay? So they're going to take whatever's the simplest route. You don't want the programmer making moral decisions. What about Mobileye? So Mobileye, basically, we just want to keep costs down. If I have to add another line of code, that means, again, more time for my programmers, more testing. At the end of the day, in the chip, it means more gates inside the chip, which means the chip is bigger, which means it costs more money. We don't want more stuff in our chip. So maybe it's the car manufacturer. Well, they just want to sell as many cars as possible, and whatever it's going to take. The drivers don't want to get killed, so we'll kill everybody else. The car owner, well, we already said, I just want everybody out of my way so I can go home, right? I mean, they're not a good person to decide. So that leaves us basically with the government, which I say is really, it's formed of the people, by the people, for the people. So now, people sometimes get upset with this and they go, oh, but you can't trust government, this and that. I'm not talking about corrupted governments, but essentially, basically you want some objective third-party observer. From what I understand, even today, governments are turning to ethical bodies and giving this to ethicists to try to make a decision and try to propose some kind of a solution. And so that's really who I think should be making this decision at the end of the day. That's more or less what Mobileye says. The CEO of Mobileye said, we are not making any moral decisions. He said, we will program, we'll do that if then else, however, whatever government tells us to do so. But we're not going to make that decision. And so that basically brings us to the last slide, which is that, again, I like to emphasize that even though we've talked about all these moral dilemmas and all these scary stuff, you know, drive into a tunnel wall or drive off a cliff or kill 5 people or all of this stuff is really interesting to discuss, and it will have to be programmed, but the odds that it's ever going to happen are very low, and there's no question that autonomous vehicles, at the end of the day, are going to save many, many lives. Thank you very much. So I'll take questions if you have.
Just explain what you mean that it's more safer to be in a car like you're saying than a regular human driver.
Okay.
Without the sensory.
Human beings kill 3,400 people a day. People look at their radio, people text, people drink and drive, people do stupid things, people have low reaction times, people are stressed, they're rushed. The last thing you want driving is a person. And I believe that within the next, I don't know, it's funny, but that's what, I mean, when I say this stuff, it's like so obvious for me, but, you know, like people ask me, like, when is this going to happen? Or do you think this is really going to happen? You know, my kids have been asking me for decades, we don't need to get a license, right, Dad? Right? Like, I mean, we're just waiting for it to happen. It's going to happen. There's different guesses about when it's going to happen. They're looking at, like, I don't know, there's a futurist by the name of Tony Seba. He says that it's going to happen by 2035. There's going to be all autonomous vehicles. It's already starting this year. There's already like robo-taxi fleets that are beginning to get set up in different cities here in Israel and also in America. It's going to happen, and it's going to change the world for the better.
How do they choose the speed? Does it go as fast as it can within a speed limit, and obviously as slow as it has to?
Right. So I mean, the speed limit thing is a very interesting question. Of course, the cars are going to drive according to whatever the traffic is. I believe that, like, in certain places and there are certain scenarios, cars will drive 250 miles an hour, however fast they can, because the only reason we have speed limits is because we have human limits. Because we get distracted, because we don't have the quick enough reaction times. We're going to have, like, you know, trucks that are going from New York to LA delivering stuff on a highway. They know what's going on all around them. They know what's going on 10 miles in front of them. They know what's going on 100 miles in front of them. They know everything. They've got all kinds of sensors going on. They can drive as fast as they want. As a matter of fact, they're already talking about having trucks freight train one against the other to save in gas, whether it's gas or electricity, to save in power. And they'll be able to drive across the country 24/7. No drivers. They'll be able to do it cheaper. The trucks, they don't have to have air conditioning and heating and plush interiors, etc. They don't have to have big bumpers and all kinds of safety mechanisms around the car. It's all safe, and it's all being done at super speeds. They've called autonomous vehicles the most disruptive technology to hit humanity. It's going to change everything. It's not just about saving lives. It's about making things cheaper, about making things faster. It's a huge change. Yeah.
If there's a flying car
Yeah.
which crashes on a self-driving car, who picks up the tab?
Oh, okay. So now the issue of liability has been discussed. We don't need to really go to flying cars. I mean, even in autonomous vehicles, like I said, we can conjure up a case where a truck dropped its load and two cars crashed into each other, whatever. There will be some accidents here and there. Who's responsible? So right now, as far as I know, lawyers are talking about this. Books are being literally written on who's liable. They asked the CEO of Mercedes who's going to be liable. So now he didn't give the legal answer, he gave a practical answer, which is the answer I'm going to give you. The CEO of Mercedes said, I'm responsible. Just buy the car. He understands that the amount of liability that he's taking on himself is negligible to the amount of money that he's going to make by selling all of these cars. And so even though the liability question doesn't need to be answered on a technical level, on a theoretical level, on a legal level, it's not going to hold up the technology. Yeah.
Do you foresee a huge increase in traffic because it's going to be so easy to jump in your car?
Right. Okay, so that's a good question. And a lot of people jump to that conclusion. But actually, they've done studies. There's a great book called Autonomy. It was written by the vice president of GM who began working with Waymo, Google. And one of the chapters he talks about is how many cars are going to really be on the road? How many cars do we really need to service a whole city? And they took the city of Ann Arbor, Michigan, okay? And they looked at the entire population. They mapped out where everybody goes all day, every day. And they said, how many cars do we need to make like a robo-taxi fleet, all right? And service everybody, that nobody waits for a car more than 2 minutes. That means that we're talking about nobody's going to have a personal car, but you're going to be able to get anywhere you want, whenever you want, with a maximum 2-minute wait for that car. Okay? And they said, they looked, at the moms who are going shopping or going to work or going to taking their kids, and the kid goes to the doctor's office, and the father goes to his meeting, and all this stuff, and then everybody goes to lunch, and then they come home and they go swimming, and they took into account everything. Okay? They found that they can get by with 15% of the number of cars in Ann Arbor, Michigan. 85% reduction in cars, okay? Now, they're not the only ones. This guy, Tony Seba, who did this whole study, who believes that the cars are going to be all autonomous by 2035, he said that there's going to be an 80% reduction in the number of cars. Basically, owning a private vehicle is going to be like owning a Learjet. Nobody's going to have it. It's going to be so cheap to just get in a pod that takes you wherever you need to go that it's going to be not worth having a private vehicle. Yeah.
So is this part of the green movement, that there'll be that much less emissions as well?
I mean, it will affect that. That's not what's driving it, but yeah, that's one of the consequences. Yeah, sorry.
So with these cars, it's mostly digitalization with programming. So is there also a lot of discussion about cybersecurity? And
Yeah, okay, so a lot of people ask this question about hacking, if a terrorist could get in and hack the car and drive the prime minister's car off of a road, or could do all kinds of things, right? So, I mean, first of all, you have to realize that, these systems are insanely complicated. I mean, for me to believe that somebody can get into the system and take control of it and do whatever they want, it seems to be pretty remote. Nevertheless, this company has an entire group that is working on the security of the system. They're the same guys that I used to work with before I worked for Mobileye. I worked for a company called NDS. NDS used to make encryption systems for pay TV. The entire company was based on making sure that the system isn't hacked. Everybody in the world wants to hack into these things and watch free TV. And so now, we used to do all kinds of things. We used to have this thing called DDTs, dirty digital tricks. And we would do all kinds of stuff, if somebody's watching the communication channel. So we used to throw out commands that don't do anything, just to throw people off the track of what do you think we're doing. We used to have inside there fake transistors. If you open up the chip and you try to mimic exactly what the chip is, half of that stuff is just fake. It doesn't do anything. There's many, many things that we do in order to make sure that people can't hack the system, besides encrypting the whole code and doing things with passwords and double passwords. And what I'm trying to say is that, for me, you have to say that any system could be hacked, but it seems to be incredibly remote.
One last thing, just that I love, for you being in Israel.
Yeah.
And in Jerusalem specifically, and working on this technology as a person whose family's returned back to Israel after 2,000 years, what is the significance of this moment for you of changing the future of the world?
Right. So, I mean, look, I actually grew up a secular Jew, you know, in America, which basically a secular Jew means that you know you're Jewish, but you have no idea why. Like, okay, I'm Jewish. When I started school at UCLA, I met some people that were religious, and that's how I got into Judaism. And basically, at the end of the day, the reason I became religious is because there's a number of reasons. A, you know, if there's a creator and you have a soul, there's a purpose, and so that's pretty important. B, it's a system of morality. And C, there's a purpose in the world, which is basically to fix the world. And you know, that's what I believe that we're here for. We're here to fix ourselves. We're here to fix the world. That's the reason I moved to Israel. This is the home of the Jewish people. This is the stage of Jewish history, and I want to try to promote those values from this country. And I think that technology is really spearheading that goal of fixing the world. As technology is developed, all of our lives are better. It's true that people can abuse technology, and we need to work on that as well. But that doesn't mean that technology needs to be, you know, reviled in any way, shape, or form. And so, I mean, to answer your question, I mean, I think that this is an amazing time to be alive. A, because of all the technological advances, and B, because we really are changing the world, and we really are making it a better place. And as a Jew that's been able to return to his own land and fulfill all of those dreams, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, we're fulfilling prophecy, you know, which is insane. I mean, I don't know if 200 years ago I would have become a religious Jew or become a rabbi, because, I mean, you know, you look around and you're trying to say, okay, so like, I don't know, right? But now, I'm not so religious, but you know, look around you. There's prophecies. Even the greatest skeptics, academics who say that the Bible was written by people, it wasn't written 100 years ago and it wasn't written 200 years ago. No matter when you put that day, they said that the Jewish people are going to be scattered around the world and they're going to come back. And we're back. And we're doing things that are like, I mean, even the success of this company, I mean, if you were on the inside and you saw how many times this place almost fell apart and didn't happen, I personally believe that it's the hand of God. And so I see that in my work every day. I see that on the street every day. And hopefully more and more people will realize that there is a creator and there is a purpose. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Like I said, if anybody wants the write-ups and the sources up from here, you're free to email me and I'll send them to you. If anybody wanted to ask me any questions personally, I can still stay and listen.
I'll box it up.
Okay.
That was so good.